After a long day, you sit in your favorite spot, look around the quiet room, and ask yourself, did I do the right thing? Maybe you pulled back from your adult children, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Not because you wanted to punish them, but because you needed peace. You needed space to breathe, to think, to heal. And yet, something strange starts to happen. You don't say a word, you don't call, you don't chase. But somehow, they begin to panic. They text more often, asking if you're okay. They ask about things they never used to care about. What you're doing, who you're seeing, how you're feeling. Some even grow frustrated or sarcastic, as if your calm is some kind of threat. And you think to yourself, why now? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today, because silence, your silence, isn't empty. It echoes. And for your children, especially those who have grown used to your emotional presence and attention, that silence speaks louder than anything you could ever say. You see when you stop reacting, when you stop stepping in to fix things, when you stop explaining yourself. It forces the people around you to sit with their own actions, their own choices. Your silence becomes a mirror. Your adult children aren't panicking because you yelled. They're panicking because you didn't correct them, didn't remind them, didn't scold or soothe or solve. And that unfamiliar quiet? It stirs something deep inside. There's a certain power in choosing peace over performance, healing over hustle, especially after 60. You've spent most of your life being the emotional anchor for others, listening, caring, doing, giving. But now, in this chapter of your life, it's okay to change direction. It's okay to stop chasing closeness that drains you. It's okay to choose yourself. And in doing that, without loud declarations or drama, you send a message. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of quiet strength. There's a myth that silence is weakness, that if you're not explaining or defending yourself, then you must have given up. But real strength often doesn't need words. It's in the steady hand that doesn't tremble. It's in the breath you take instead of the argument you avoid. Your children may not know how to handle this. They might be used to a version of you that is always available, always emotionally responsive. And now that you've stepped back, not angrily, just peacefully, they don't know what to do with the space. They start imagining things. Is mom upset with me? Why is dad being distant? Did I do something wrong? You haven't accused anyone. You haven't raised your voice. But your absence is louder than any argument you could have started. And the most interesting part is, they feel it. They feel the shift. Because most people, especially those closest to us, expect us to keep playing the roles we've always played. If you were the fixer, the helper, the forgiver, they expect that forever. When you step off that stage and close the curtain, it unsettles them. That's not manipulation. That's growth. And yes, it can be painful. You might miss them. You might even question yourself. But that's where the second truth comes in. Controlling your emotions doesn't mean suppressing them. It means understanding them, then choosing how and when to respond. At this point in life, emotions run deep. You've lived through love and loss, disappointment and celebration. And you've learned, hopefully, that not every feeling needs an immediate reaction. Not every wound needs to be broadcast. You can hurt without showing it. You can love without clinging. And you can miss someone without letting that longing steer your whole ship off course. This kind of emotional discipline isn't cold. It's courageous. It means you no longer allow your feelings to be used against you. That you don't pour yourself into people who treat your time like a backup plan. You might remember times when you reached out only to be ignored, times when you explained yourself only to be misunderstood. Now you're done explaining, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for your own peace. This new version of you, it's not the broken one, it's the rebuilt one. You're learning how to transform that ache in your chest into quiet strength. You're beginning to realize that you're not responsible for carrying everyone's emotional baggage. Not anymore. You're responsible for your own healing. And healing doesn't need a spotlight. You don't have to announce it. You don't need to prove it. Instead of posting quotes or sending long messages, you simply live. That's how you start turning pain into power. Not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by refusing to let the hurt define what happens next. You might wake up some mornings still feeling that hollow space where connection used to be, and that's okay. That's part of healing, too. But each time you resist the urge to reach out for validation, each time you choose stillness over reaction, you grow stronger and they feel it. Your children may not say it out loud. Pride is a tricky thing. But make no mistake, they notice the change. They notice that you're no longer chasing, no longer trying to be heard in rooms that never listened. They may think they've moved on, that they've replaced the emotional bond you once gave so freely. But here's where reality sets in. Replacement is an illusion. When someone has been a steady presence in your life, you can't just swap them out like a piece of furniture. You might try, you might distract yourself, but eventually the absence catches up. Maybe your kids spend more time with friends, or pour their energy into work, or even get closer with their in-laws. But when the music quiets, when the phones go dark, they start to feel something missing. Not the gifts you gave, not the errands you ran, but the emotional safety you represented. The calm, steady love, the listening ear, the way your presence made everything feel a little less heavy. That can't be replaced. And you don't need to prove that. You just need to be. There's something deeply attractive about a person who's no longer seeking approval. Someone who's not trying to be chosen anymore because they finally chose themselves. You might not feel that strength every day, but it's growing in you quietly. You're rebuilding, not to show them what they lost, but to remind yourself of what you never should have forgotten, your own worth. Even now, as you sit in the stillness wondering what comes next, trust this. You are becoming not again, not better, just whole. And the best part, you don't need to say a word. You don't need to shout to be heard, not anymore. Your calm speaks volumes. The silence you've chosen. It's not a void, it's a boundary. A gentle, invisible fence that says, this is where I begin, and where I stop letting myself be pushed past what I can carry. And whether your children realize it or not, they feel it. They feel it when their messages go unanswered, just a little longer. They feel it when you no longer offer yourself like a lifeline to every problem. They feel it when your voice stops rushing in to smooth things over, to make excuses for them, to fix what you never broke in the first place. And that's when the second guessing starts, because before, they were used to you being available, emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically, even when it left you drained. You were the safety net, the one they expected to catch them. But now, you're stepping back, and not in anger, in clarity. You've realized that just because someone is your child doesn't mean they have the right to your energy on demand. Love doesn't mean servitude, and your silence isn't punishment. It's self-preservation. But they don't always see it that way, because when you were always there, always explaining, always reaching out, they knew what role you played. You were the anchor. You were predictable, reliable, constant. Now you've become quiet, still, centered. You're not reacting, and they're not sure how to interpret that. So they start to imagine, they wonder if they've lost something, and they have. Not your love, but your effort. They feel the shift, and that shift becomes unsettling. Because people don't miss you when you're loud. They miss you when your silence makes them face themselves. And for your children, especially those who may have taken your presence for granted. Your calm detachment becomes the very thing they can't stop thinking about. You've probably heard the phrase, out of sight, out of mind, but that's not always true. When someone once held your attention, your energy, your support, and then suddenly doesn't, the absence becomes heavy. It lingers. It leaves questions in its place. And when you don't offer answers, their minds become the battlefield. That's the next shift you start to notice. It's not about control. It's about the fact that when someone can no longer read you, they begin to read into everything. They reread your last text. They remember the tone of your voice at the last visit. They look for signs, anything that can tell them where you are emotionally, but you're not playing that game. You've stepped off the board. You're not reacting. You're not defending. You're not explaining yourself over and over to people who weren't listening in the first place. That's when the overthinking starts, on their end. They wonder if you've moved on, if you're hurt, if you're angry, if you're seeing someone, if you're happy without them. They ask themselves, why isn't mom calling like she used to? Or why did dad stop asking about my job? And your answer, though unspoken, is honest. Because I'm giving myself back to me. You've stopped living in reaction to their emotional ups and downs. You've stopped measuring your worth by how needed you are in their lives. And that, my friend, is when you become magnetic. It's not about playing games. It's about living with intention. You're no longer pouring energy into people who don't pour anything back. You're watering your own roots. And in doing so, you're becoming something they're not used to seeing, a version of you that isn't tied to their approval. You are changing the dynamic. You're not cold. You're calm. You're not distant. You're grounded. And that difference is what pulls people in. We tend to chase what we can't predict. And for perhaps the first time, your kids are no longer sure how to approach you. That's okay. Let them wonder. Let them wrestle with the silence. Because in that silence, they might finally hear themselves. Let's not forget, you didn't arrive at this place overnight. It took a lot to finally say, no more. No more emotional tug-of-war. No more chasing conversations that go nowhere. No more trying to be heard by those who only listen when they need something. You've learned to rebuild from within. And here's the most beautiful part. Your rebuilding doesn't need to be announced. You don't need to post pictures of your progress. You don't need to send messages that hint at how okay you are now. You just live quietly, steadily, peacefully. You go to the market and pick out your favorite fruit. You sit in the sun and let the warmth touch your face. You make yourself dinner and eat it with gratitude, not loneliness. You find new books, new walks, new conversations, and all the while, they're watching. Maybe not directly, but they notice. They notice the silence. They notice the stillness. They notice that you're no longer circling their lives. Like a satellite waiting to be called upon. You've become your own planet now. And that gravity shift, that's felt. They may not say it. They may not even fully understand it yet, but something has changed. You're not the same. You're not begging to be included or aching to be seen. You're just okay. And that, in its quiet power, speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. You've chosen a return that isn't loud or public. You're returning to yourself. And that return, that inner shift, is stronger than anything they expected. Because people don't panic when you leave, they panic when you leave. And don't come back the same. That's when they realize they weren't just visiting your life, they were shaping it. And now that you've taken back that brush to paint your own picture, they're left staring at the blank space where your old patterns used to be. This doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you love them with wisdom now. Love with boundaries. Love without burnout. Love that gives from overflow, not depletion. You are not disappearing. You are evolving. And in that quiet, gentle evolution, you become the steady heartbeat in your own life again. Not for attention, not for validation, but because you finally remembered who you were before the noise. And the beauty is, you're doing it without raising your voice. You're not performing healing, you're living it. You're not trying to be noticed, you're becoming noticeable through presence alone. And little by little, your children will come to understand, maybe not with words, maybe not with grand gestures, but they'll feel it. And one day, perhaps when they least expect it, they'll look back and realize, you didn't walk away from them, you walked back to yourself. And in doing so, you gave them the invitation to do the same. You're not trying to teach anyone a lesson. You're not punishing your children. You're simply healing, quietly, carefully, and for the first time in a long time, without guilt. Because healing isn't loud, it's not dramatic or wrapped in grand declarations. Sometimes it looks like a soft morning when you don't rush. Sometimes it sounds like silence, when you no longer fill the space just to keep everyone else comfortable. And while you're doing that, just breathing, just being, something unexpected starts to happen. Their minds begin to wander. Maybe you used to be the one always checking in first, asking if they've eaten, if they're okay, if they needed anything. Maybe you used to apologize just to end the argument, even when you weren't the one who started it. Maybe you said yes when you meant no, just to keep the peace. And now you're not doing that anymore. That absence, it stirs their thoughts. It creates silence where they're used to noise. And in that silence, the real conversations begin. Not with you, but within themselves. They start wondering if they pushed too far, if they took too much, if they stopped listening when it mattered. They might scroll through old messages, looking for clues in your words. They might stare at your last photo, wondering if you're okay, or if you finally decided you don't need them like you once did. And the truth is, you haven't stopped loving them, but you've stopped living in response to them. That difference might confuse them at first. It might even scare them. Because when someone has always been emotionally available, emotionally predictable, and they suddenly become calm and grounded, that energy shift is powerful. It forces a reckoning. They're not used to seeing you like this. There's no outburst, no lecture, no guilt. Just you. Solid, quiet, unreachable in the best way. And whether they say it out loud or not, they start to realize that the person they thought would always be there has changed. You're not floating in their orbit anymore. You've become your own sun again. And that's when the illusion of control begins to fall away. You see, when someone believes they can always get your attention, your forgiveness, your presence, they start to mistake that for permanence. They think they can replace the feeling you gave them with something else. But connection can't be replaced with convenience. They may try to fill the space with distractions, other people, busier schedules, things that make them feel like everything is fine. But replacements don't heal. They only delay the moment when the heart finally says, "This doesn't feel the same." Because you were never just a parent. You were a presence, a steady hand, a light in dark places, a voice of reason, a soft place to land. And when they finally understand that, it's not regret that hits first. It's realization. The realization that maybe they didn't lose you when you walked away. Maybe they lost you when they stopped appreciating who you were. But you're not sitting around waiting for them to figure it out. That's the beauty of where you are now. You're not bitter. You're not stuck. You're not even angry. You're just different. You've been through enough to know that peace is more valuable than proximity, that being needed isn't the same as being respected, that closeness without care is just noise. And now, you don't chase noise. You don't compete with distractions. You don't beg to be seen because you finally see yourself. And that vision, it changes everything. You no longer look in the mirror and wonder, what more can I give? You look in the mirror now and say, what do I need to keep? That shift from giving away your energy to guarding it, that's not selfish. That's sacred. Because when you rebuild from within, when your heart starts to feel whole again, something inside you clicks. You stop hoping for closure. You stop needing answers. You stop tying your peace to someone else's apology. And that is the strongest return of all. The one in the soul. It's not a comeback with applause or announcements. It's a homecoming. Back to yourself. Back to the version of you that doesn't flinch at distance, that doesn't fear silence, that doesn't trade dignity for connection. It's when you wake up and realize you haven't thought about the pain in days, that the ache that once felt unbearable has softened, that your joy doesn't hinge on whether or not someone texts back. That's not just healing. That's freedom. And you earned it. You've carried so many people for so long. You've held space. You've stayed strong. You've stayed kind when it wasn't returned. And now you're finally holding that same space for yourself. And if your children are watching, and they are, what they'll see isn't a parent who gave up. They'll see someone who grew up even more into a deeper kind of strength. A quiet kind. A solid kind. A kind that doesn't shout or shake, but stands still and steady. You've become the example, not the emotional crutch. You've become the lighthouse, not the life raft. And someday, they may come back. Not out of habit, but out of respect. Not to be saved, but to reconnect. And when they do, you'll greet them from a place of wholeness. Not because you need them to fill your heart, but because your heart is full enough to welcome them without losing yourself again. So wherever you are in this journey, whether you're just stepping away or have been walking alone for a while, trust that silence can be healing. Trust that detachment can be loving. And trust that returning to yourself is the greatest gift you could ever give. Not just to you, but to those who love you. Even if they don't know how to show it right now, let your life be your message. Let your peace speak, louder than pain ever did. Let your stillness be the proof that healing doesn't mean going backward. It means coming home. To you. If this spoke to you, I'd love to hear your story. In the comments, has your silence ever said more than your words could? And if you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life, where we're building a space for wisdom, healing, and power at every age. Here's to living your truth, protecting your peace, and staying rooted in the one relationship that will never leave you. Your relationship with yourself. You've done enough. You've given enough. And now, it's your time to simply be.